Hi there. I'm Rick Lemoyne. I am the Chief Medical Officer at EvoNexus, which is a startup incubator in San Diego. For many years, I was the Chief Medical Information Officer at Sharp Healthcare in San Diego. Um, these are exciting times. AI is having an enormous impact across business in general, but especially in healthcare. We're having this time when AI is starting to help clinicians work together, and the sum of this whole picture seems to be, in the very near future, will be that the sum of the parts, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I always screw that up. A few examples of what's really changing. Ambient technology is giving time back to busy clinicians with their dictation and charting. AI is removing some of the background noise, the little pebbles in the shoe that slow us down during the day with charts, labs, years of notes, trying to assemble them together. Tools are shifting from being reactive to proactive, surfacing the care gap of recommendation before the clinician has to go looking for it. Kind of a aide de memoire that this person has an HCC or this person really needs to have their lab X measured. One company that's doing a lot of this is GW RhythmX. I've been very impressed with their progress over the last couple of years. Let's take a look at a video to see where they stand today. So that's the direction we all want to follow, making it easier for the physician to do the right thing at the right time. But one thing seems to be overlooked. In the rush to deploy, and that's really the reason why we're here, is to find out how reliable, how safe AI should be when helping to care for patients. Recent studies highlight this in bright light. ECRI named Navigating the AI Diagnostic Dilemma the #1 patient safety concern for 2026. A global clinician survey found that 92% of physicians have encountered AI-generated medical misinformation, either a hallucination or a confabulation, whichever part of neurology you come from. And most healthcare AI developers have not published clinical validation framework or even know what that is. I want to turn to our distinguished panel now. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself very briefly, tell what you do, tell where you are, and then we'll get into the problem.
Hi guys, my name is Dr. Mandy Dailey, and I'm a board certified family medicine, sports medicine, and clinical informatics physician. So I'm board certified in all three. I'm an assistant professor at the University of South Florida. I'm a medical director of quality and population health, and I'm a certified Epic physician builder and clinical consultant for RhythmX.
Hi guys, my name is Dr. Paul Nanda. I'm also family medicine trained like Dr. Dailey. Spent some time in academics at The Ohio State University and transitioned to full-time urgent care role here in Tampa, Florida. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of TGH Urgent Care, powered by Fast Track. We have 21 clinics and oversee about 70 clinicians and about 200,000 patient visits a year. And I'm a fellow of the College of Urgent Care Medicine as well.
And I'm Lori Walker. I'm with Presbyterian Healthcare Services out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. My background is in pediatrics. I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner, and I am our Chief Medical Information Officer.
Great, thank you. Let's get back to the problem. AI diagnostics was named one of the top safety concerns for 2006, as I mentioned. A Nature Medicine study found that a major consumer AI tool, ChatGPT, but they all have the same issue, under-triaged about 52% of true emergencies, sending patients with conditions like diabetic ketoacidosis home instead of back to the ED. For where each of you sit, what's really going wrong there? And Lori, let's ask you to kick this off.
Yeah, so I mean, I really think the lack of the clinical validation and what the vendors can speak to, I think that's really missing. And so as we are working in our organization to roll out AI in the clinical space, we're really making sure that we're focusing on what is the problem that we're trying to solve and make sure that that is very clearly stated. Is technology the right tool to fix the problem, or one of the tools to fix the problem? And then as we look at technology, is AI and what form of AI the right technology solution to fix the problem? And I think as we even look at some of the Epic AI versus what we've done in rolling out RhythmX, I think the level of validation is exactly where our physicians and advanced practice clinicians, that's the first thing they're asking about. They want to know the level of validation that's been done from a clinical perspective, not just the technical. And as we rolled that out, even as we educated them on the level of validation that's been done with RhythmX, the clinical validation, we saw very many of them still taking on the burden to do some of the validation themselves. And that's just the trust and transparency in the tool, which I'm not the least bit surprised when you're working with physicians and advanced practice clinicians.
Terrific. Mandy, what's your take on this?
I think that as somebody who works in building this and validating and doing that clinical validation that Lori had talked about, I think the gap between what some AI products produce and what is actually safe to act on is a large gap in a lot of places. And I think that, like, there was a lot of hoopla about ChatGPT passing the medical boards, right? But passing a test is a minimum standard in medicine. It is not the maximum standard. And nuance and ambiguity, like, that's where medicine actually gets practiced, right? And I think that's what that Nature article really spoke to, was like, it did not do well with nuance or ambiguity, right? And that right there is the practice of medicine, and that's the gap that a lot of AI tools just can't meet right now.
Thanks for that. Paul, what's your take?
Yeah, so for years as a practicing clinician, right, patients would get responses from Google, which would invariably lead them to the worst possible diagnosis, no matter what. So, as we roll out AI in a lot of platforms, there is a rush to get to use it with the end result of trying to make a better user experience for patients and for clinicians. But a tool is only as good as its user, right? If you have a tool that's not validated, that you're not looking at those nuances, it's only as good as the prompts you're putting in, right? So now we see patients coming in, they've already chat GPT'd and they have some ideas, but if they're not asking the right questions or providing the right level of detail, they're not going to get the correct answers, or they'll have false assumptions. So I think the ability to clinically validate any large language model is going to be really, really important kind of moving forward. Hammer is a great tool, but if you don't know how to use it, it can be a very dangerous tool as well.
So the three of you seem to be describing a trust problem here. What is it about these systems that are causing these failures? And is there some optimum way of approaching this? Mandy, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, and I tell this to my med students and residents, right? The first thing that I need to know when it comes to trust, just in basic medicine, is if you don't know the answer, don't give me a bad one. Don't give me one you just made up, right? And it doesn't matter if it's a med student, a resident, or an AI, do not make up an answer. And I think that if the system cannot tell you that, if it can't surface uncertainty, if it can't tell you when it doesn't know the answer, that should be a very big red flag, right? Because my learners can tell me, albeit a little sheepishly sometimes, I actually don't know the answer to that, right? So I need the AI to do that same exact thing. And so I think that's one level of it. The other thing is what we talk a lot about in AI, and like, we have some organizations that are really helping us regulate some of this. But the transparency and the explainability, right? Lori kind of alluded to this, right? Like, they wanted the users, the end users, as I say in my physician builder mind, they are deciding whether or not they can trust the system, and they're going to decide on that trust based off of explainability of where the information came from and transparency, right? So like and I think that is something that's really, really important, and it's important at all stages, right? AI is not something you can test one time and then say, yeah, we were good this one time, and then continue to use it and not continue to test it. So that transparency and explainability is really, really vital, in addition to it telling you, I may not know the answer, or I have incomplete information to make that recommendation with.
Thanks, Mandy. Another thing that comes to my mind is that every vendor says you can trust our system. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about clinical decisions that affect patients' lives, what does this trust really require? And how is the bar different for clinical AI versus some other issues in medicine today? Lori, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I think the bar should match or exceed the clinical research, right? And so perspective, real world evaluation, right? Clinically meaningful endpoints, transparency methodology, and reproducibility, reviews. I think a lot of it also comes down to the health systems. The governance plays a key role, committee evaluating, transparency from the vendor, regulatory and ethical framework. And then Dr. Dailey said the local performance monitoring. So I think all of that has to play a part in it.
Yeah, and
Paul?
Rick, I think what Dr. Daly said was really important. It's not a one-time thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not a, oh, I did my first two passes with it and it seemed good to me, and then never have that ongoing validation. So, I think we've always kind of lived in a trust but verify methodology, and so you really need kind of ongoing kind of maintenance validation to ensure that the output you're getting is clinically accurate and relevant and actionable. So, knowing where the information is coming from, where is this being sourced from, and then is it accurate and verifiable and trustworthy? And over time, that you build that trust and comfort level, right? It's like when I drive my Tesla and it's on autopilot, it took a long time before I fully started to trust the decisions it was going to make, right? The first time you're grabbing that wheel, and it's the same thing with, any AI tool. The first time you use it, you're like, I don't know what's happening right here. And then you slowly learn to trust that output. That takes an ongoing repetition of validation in the clinical space.
Yeah, I would even say I think one of the things in our current use with RhythmX and rolling it out and gaining that trust is the source data, right? Everybody wants to know that. I mean, even with our Epic, our practice alerts, or what they referred to as best practice advisories. I mean, we were always putting the source of why we were showing that and where that's coming from. And the physicians and advanced practice clinicians, they want to know that. They want to read into that. And that's where you start to gain some of that trust, is that this is coming up and this is the source that supports that. Because they will click on that and they will review it and make sure that it's accurate until they truly gain that trust. And then in that, they want to know that all of those clinical guidelines or sources are being updated to the most accurate, the most recent, so that they can continue to trust it. So I think that's part of it as well.
So what we're talking about here is really clinical trust, and that for AI, the bar may be set a little different. But I'm very curious as to what this clinical validation should mean for the industry, because right now I don't think there is an agreed upon standard. Mandy, do you have some thoughts here?
I really love this question of clinical validation because this is something that I think is incredibly important. Um, Validation sounds like a stamp of approval. And when we are doing clinical validation, I'm saying we because my partners and I at RhythmX, my clinical partners that are going through and doing this, I'm stress testing the system. I'm not saying, oh, the system gave me the answer that I would expect as a clinician, as a family medicine, sports medicine doc with 10 years of experience. I'm stress testing the system and trying to push it to see that's the validation, right? It's not just did it get it right and give it a benchmark and kind of a check mark. It really is, how can I test this system? When I'm thinking about this, and you guys might laugh a little bit at this, but when I'm thinking about testing, I'm thinking about I go in here with the thought process of if I'm working on a patient and it's Friday at 11:45 and I'm hungry, I've had a full week, I'm starting to reach hangry a little bit. What do I need this system to look like so that I do right by this patient, so that my human needs that are frequent don't interfere with the care of this patient? How is the system going to support me then when I might be a little distracted, when I might be a little whatever, and stress the system in that way? And I think I agree with you, Rick. I don't think anybody has a great framework. I'm biased with RhythmX. I think we have a fantastic framework of clinical validation, but I don't think there are a standard across all AI products for clinical validation. And I think it's just really, really important to I hear validation and I think I'm putting a stamp of approval on it, but that's not it. It really is clinical stress testing and really getting to how can we make sure that in all ways, whether it's the standardized approach or edge cases, that the system is working as intended. And that's really what our goal is in the clinical validation process.
Thanks. Paul. Think you're on mute, Paul.
Sorry about that. So yeah, I agree with what Dr. Daly said. This is not a rubber stamp, right? This is an ongoing maintenance of information using real world data, using real life examples, because there are most of the cases that we come across with patients. It's not just what is the recommended treatment algorithm for X. It's they have this, these are their social determinants of health, these are their potential outcomes, these are their allergies, these are the USPSTF guidelines for recommended care. So it's an ongoing evaluation of real life examples that really builds that trust into a system that you can then actually use and implement into practice.
Yeah, it's the real life one that catches you. I mean, I remember all of the times when evaluating a new EMR product, they would present patients with one home med and then teach you how to do um, right, teach you how to do MedRec. Doesn't work like that, does it, Lori?
Oh, I think for us, this is really kind of what separated RhythmX for us. Um, is that they had kind of already done this level of clinical validation before we deployed. Now, I will say, just my role and responsibility in our role as the CMIO is, again, I have the trust of our physicians and APCs, not the vendor. And so I have to gain the trust of our physicians and APCs as I'm rolling this out. And so I think one of the things that was really great with our partnership is the a couple of the physicians from the RhythmX team came on site every time we were going to roll out. And so it's not that they were sitting there just working with the technical team or with Deepti, but they were with the physicians that had done the validation. And hearing physician to physician and being able to speak to the level of clinical validation that had already been done, I think started to gain that trust quickly. And then as they started to use the tool, and this was part of the reason of starting small and rolling out in 20 or 30 providers at a time until we expanded to 200 in primary care. But they were doing some of that validation themselves. And then as they've slowly, I wouldn't say slowly, they quickly started to trust the tool. And we could see that in our usage numbers. But I think RhythmX did a really great job of truly educating our physicians and APCs on what does it mean to do clinical validation, and how do you kind of compare that when we are talking to medical providers and they're used to talking about clinical research, right? How do you compare that? How do you educate on that? Because that's where they're wanting to be, and gaining that trust and explaining what that is. They did a great job of really going into depth on what the team does.
So Lori, I want to stick with you for just another couple of minutes. What would you advise a person who is evaluating something like RhythmX to do? What questions do they need to ask? How do you look under the covers a little bit? Because you've obviously done this.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so I think the clinical validation is by far the first thing that you should be looking at, right? And comparing that to, again, matching or exceeding clinical research. So I think the clinical validation is very key. And then I think ultimately, again, what's the problem that other organizations are trying to solve for? Because I think RhythmX it can do so much. I think for us, when we really went down the path, we were taking a multi-pronged approach to cognitive burden and administrative burden on our physicians and advanced practice clinicians. And we had heard them that they want to spend more meaningful time with the patient and less time in the chart. They felt like they were sitting in front of their patients, but yet they're sitting in front of their computer in Epic, and they're not really getting those meaningful conversations. And so we were trying to figure out something of how can we help them with that time spent in chart search and chart review. And when we looked at our patient populations, the complexity, especially post-pandemic, an average of 11 problems on a problem list, right? That makes a visit very complex. And the amount of data that's living in that chart. So how do we help them efficiently, but yet with good quality, still review that chart? And honestly, how does the tool then help surface up some of those things that we might as a human miss or overlook just because there's so much information in the chart. So that was really what we were going after. And then as we started to use the tool, just the other things that it can uncover, social determinants of health is huge. And that plays into a lot of the social determinants of health drivers, plays into quality measures and things like that you're trying to meet. I mean, it ultimately kind of becomes one big circle. HCC, we started to uncover some of the suspected conditions, which also leads to quality, cost, all of that. So again, really defining the problem that you're trying to solve for. But yeah, I think the ongoing iterative validation is really what shapes the tool.
Terrific. Thanks for that. Have you been able to teach it how to give a doctor a dope slap?
No.
Well, get on that.
Yeah, that's phase 2. David, write that down.
Paul, I want to get your perspective as a CMO on evaluating this, not just from the individual physician, but from the organization's perspective.
Yeah, so there's a lot of tools, right, that come to the market. They offer a lot of things. They say, oh, we're going to reduce cognitive burden, we're going to make it more efficient, we're going to get your ROI higher. But if people aren't using the tools, right, you're never going to see those gains. So we want something that really, from an organizational standpoint, moves the needle, right, in terms of better efficiency, better lower burnout, longer retention from our providers. And then, like Lori alluded to, better quality of care and outcomes at the end of the day, right? So if you can find a tool that makes sense for our providers, that it makes their job more enjoyable, easier, more effective and efficient, but also decreases cognitive burden and increases, the quality of outcomes for patients, then you're really ticking off a lot of boxes. But it's not until you have the adoption of any tool that you really become, kind of efficient, that tool works for a practice. So, at Tampa General, one of their taglines is that they innovate. And so part of that innovation, it becomes looking not just in actual, brick and mortar, CLIA wave testing, things like that. It's the innovation and using technology to make a better workforce and a happier workforce. So, we see the stress on healthcare workers has been really amplified post-pandemic, with burnout and people leaving the industry altogether. So there are definitely tools that you can use that are applicable to our everyday, every situation patient care. And even some of the early tools that we adopted, like the feedback that we got from some of our employees were, I was going to quit this job. It was too much. It was too much cognitive load. And now I can finish my notes on time. I can get out of the clinic and I'm enjoying my job better. And so that decrease in turnover and the increase in retention that we have is really, like, from a management side, is really palatable, right? I want people to come to work and enjoy their jobs, enjoy their patient care. And, sometimes EMR was sold to us years ago as it's going to make you more efficient. And we certainly know that has not been the case. It's made us far less efficient, maybe better documentation in some capacity, but definitely not more efficient. And I think we're finally at a point that this is the biggest thing that's kind of happened in my career, where we can get to using tools and deploying tools that make sense and drive better care and better job satisfaction.
I'm curious now, even more curious than before we started, as to what personal experiences the three of you have had or have noticed in the organizations that you have worked with. Mandy, you want to give me a couple?
Yeah, so, I think when I first was in medical school, right? So 2012, I started medical school, and the Morris study had just come out in 2011 saying that it takes 17 years for clinical research to meet the patient. And I remember sitting there in that lecture hall and be like, 17 years? Like, we've got all this good stuff, and like we've got this rigorous clinical research that tells us that this treatment works. Why are we waiting 17 years to get it to the patient? And I think, to that point, there's a lot of rigor, there's a lot of expectation, there's reproducibility, there's a lot of regulation around it, rightfully so. But I just felt like 17 years, like for some people, they're not even going to see the benefit of these treatments if I have to wait 17 years. And so for me, one of the things that has really made a huge difference is getting the guidelines, getting the clinical guidelines and getting them when they're updated, and getting them to the clinician faster. The difficulty with guidelines, and any practicing clinician will be aware of this, is that they are very, very long. They are very, very in depth to cover all the comorbidities, and they're very, very vague at times, right? They are meant to be able to be applied to everybody within the United States. And the United States is very diverse, and so they are intentionally vague at times. And it's like, how do you digest? Again, I'm a family medicine doctor, so I have lots of guidelines that I'm supposed to be following from multiple societies and organizations, right? And so, how do I digest all of that, right? And I think AI is a real strong point for us to be able to digest that information. And one of the places that we've done that was with the ADA guidelines in 2025. So we had a 396-page 2025 ADA update for diabetes because we have new drug classes that are awesome for diabetes, like SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 agonists. And we had all this stuff, but there was no updated guidelines. So 2025 rolls around, we have new guidelines. We're going to digest this 396-page ADA guideline and figure out how to make it digestible for our LLM. It's got tables, it's got charts, it's not just text, it's got ambiguity. So how do we distill this down? And I think that's another piece of like the human in the loop for RhythmX is a physician, right? Like we are practicing clinicians that are doing this work. And so partnering with the humans and digesting this information, feeding it to the LLM, now we're able to get that to the clinicians faster, right? Those next best actions of recommending SGLT2 inhibitors, especially for patients who have chronic kidney disease comorbidities, heart failure comorbidities, those things are surfacing quickly and are already implemented in the product. And so instead of 17 years, we're well under 1 year of getting it applied and hopefully actually benefiting our patients and providing not just like, better quality care. Because as a medical director of quality, sometimes I hear quality and I think metrics, right?
Yeah.
I get like numbers in my head. But really, like, how do I provide better care for my patients so that their quality of life, their longevity is improved by the time I'm done with them?
Terrific.
It's how to take an insurmountable amount of data information and process it into something that's actionable for your patient.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really, really good solution that does just that. Because like Mandy says, as a family doc, we're doing peds, I'm doing women's health, I'm doing geriatrics, I'm doing screening, I'm doing wellness. I mean, it's such a vast broad that it's impossible just to even keep up with all the different guidelines. And then some of the times the guidelines conflict, right? And you're like, well, what guidelines, what is the medical justification I need to really implement a solution for this patient who's with me for 15 or 20 minutes in real time? And the clinical validation aspect of that, it really helps focus on into something that becomes actionable for your patients.
Lori, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, on top of what Dr. Dailey and Dr. Nanda said, is we're an integrated delivery system. So on top of adding all the guidelines and adding all the quality measures and the screenings and the care gaps and all the things we're trying to manage, being an integrated delivery system, having our own health plan, we're also trying to drive cost, and we're looking at formulary. And so we were actually trying to build something on our own. We were working with expert analysts, we were working with our technical support from Epic, and we were just trying to build something similar to this around one chronic condition, which was diabetes. And we were trying to use CER rules and OPAs and all kinds of different build in Epic, not including AI at all. That was back in 24. I mean, I think we worked on that for a year and a half and could never get it live. And what we were trying to drive with that is it being able to ping our pharmacy benefits, being able to look at that formulary. what medication should we be prescribing at this point for this patient based on their labs? And then if the patient comes back in and they're on an expensive medication and their labs are not coming down, do we just keep them on that medication? It's expensive. It may not be working. How do we support that clinical decision making based on cost, quality, and the patient's lab results? So really kind of hyper personalized. And so that's when I saw RhythmX that I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we're trying to build out, an epic custom build that was just really complex. And so I think also, and we were going to have to do all of our own clinical validation on all of that build. And so the fact that we went live with 9 providers in February of 25, and by December, we were rolled out to all 200, just goes to show how quickly that all happened and how quickly they expanded, starting with 4 conditions to 64. I mean, we could never have done that on our own.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take a wild guess here and suggest that perhaps I'm the oldest person in the room. And I've just jotted down that I've been involved with 7 deployments of systems, from Clinicomp to Epic, Clinicomp 1984. I'm always told that just plug it in and it'll run. There's got to be some issues with training, adoption. Lori, I hate to keep coming to you, but I will ask the other folks as well. But you seem to be on the front lines of this. What kind of friction is there, and what kind of pushback is there?
Yeah. So I think some of it is that we were rolling out ambient listening right around the same time. So I think also, again, when you're talking about decreasing cognitive burden, when you're rolling out new tools like this to your clinicians, that somewhat adds to cognitive burden, right? They have to change. They do have to make some changes. They have to learn new tools. That can be overwhelming. So I think the timing, so I think the partnership with your operational leadership as you're thinking about rolling out some of these AI tools is important to make sure that you're truly aligned on the rollout framework and the time and all of that. I think trust is the biggest thing. And that's why it was so important for me, again, in vetting vendors, but also as we rolled out each kind of phased rollout that we took, I was boots on the ground with the RhythmX team, because our physicians and APCs are going to trust me more than they're going to trust a vendor. And that's no offense to a vendor, but we work with a lot of vendors, and there are some that really knock it out of the park, and there's others that don't. And so I think we never just kind of send our vendors out into the clinics directly to work with our physicians and APCs. So I was boots on the ground. I was at the elbow with them, which is why we took a small phased approach. Did it take a little bit longer? Yes, but it was very important to me to be at the elbow as we rolled out this kind of technology to gain that trust. And then it also, I think what it showed our physicians and APCs is that they trust me, and hey, she trusts this vendor. And so I'm going to open up and trust this vendor a little bit more. And now they've established really great relationships with the RhythmX team, and that they can contact them directly if they think there's an issue, or if they have an idea that they want to work on, or so I think the timing of it, being aligned with operational leadership, I think relationship and transparency on your rollout is really, really key. I think
Mandy, what's your take on this?
Sorry, I was just going to add one more thing,
Sure.
Mandy, there. I think the other thing is, again, I cannot express the validation conversation enough. Our physicians and APCs really asked the RhythmX AI team to come in and do a full-blown presentation on what is their clinical validation. So that was very key. I would just say offer that up right out of the gate. And then I think the way it was embedded into the EHR workflow, it was very little friction and very little change. So
Cool.
I think that Lori, I love everything that you're saying. And I am I love the like hands-on approach to that work, right? Because I think, like you said, the operational component is really important, right? We've kind of a little bit talked about the clinical governance piece, right? And we own that at RhythmX, our clinical guidelines, our clinical content that we're kind of going off of. We're owning that, updating that, doing that clinical validation with. But there's other governance that needs to go around implementations and all of that other stuff. And you're right that we need a strong partnership with that. And that I think that that's one of the reasons with such success. But I think the other thing is like, and Dr. Nanda had alluded to this as well, but like usability. If you cannot get clinicians to use the product, it's dead and it's DOA,
Yeah.
right? So we recognize that at RhythmX, right? So at GW RhythmX, we recognize that I basically tell them, our dev team, we have one shot. And if you can't get this right in this one shot for this clinician, they're never going to do it again because they're already drowning. I'm drowning, right? Like we're already drowning. And so if you can't get this right in one shot, if the latency is too long, if it doesn't match what they think is accurate, if you're giving them a guideline that doesn't match where they think this guideline should be coming from, you have lost them. And I think that that approach and that intensity of that approach has really been throughout our clinical validation team, our dev team, and honestly, our leadership, right? Our CEO. It goes all the way through the chain of like, there's one good shot for this with clinicians. Because when we talk about cognitive burden, our clinicians are stressed. And yeah, if we add more stuff for them to learn how to do, that's problematic. I'm a certified Epic physician builder. There's a lot within Epic that I really like. And I think that the builds can be kind of complex and stuff. But anytime we roll something out, I have to send out quick tip sheets. I have to do some training for people. Like it's kind of like hands-on, right? I have a training implementation. And there is training involved in this, but it's pretty minimal when we roll out this product, right? You are not having to sit in a 4-hour training for how to utilize this product. And I think the usability and the adoptability has been shown in some of the numbers that Lori had mentioned earlier of rapid rollout, and the people who have used it continue to keep using it. And I think that is that's the gold star that I like to, right? Are my end users continuing to use the product? Great. We're doing a good job,
Yeah, I think the user interface is very important. If you make it easy and the quality is good, then you're going to have good adoption. But like Mandy said, talking about Epic, Epic is a hugely powerful tool, but man, sometimes it's really difficult to roll those things, out when they make changes. So you have a thin window to capture your audience, and the easier you make it, the more intuitive you make it, the better. So, it's easy to change the process. It's hard to change behaviors. And you have people practicing for a long, long time, and you're asking them to make a change. But if they have a really good response early on, it becomes much easier to change both the behavior and the process.
Yeah.
Thanks. Let's go to what I refer to as short snappers. I want to ask everybody for one piece of advice, less than 60 seconds, for somebody evaluating an AI system.
I would
Paul?
say oh,
Yep.
So
I was just going to say, I think we've said it over and over again, clinical validation framework. Educate me on your clinical validation framework and the full depth of the platform and where all the data is coming from, I think is really important. All of your sources.
Yep, looking at the data, looking at your source material, where is the information coming from? Is it something that's usable and actionable? Is it highly reliable? The high reliability comes back to clinical validation and ongoing clinical validation and support.
And as a clinical validator, I would like to say clinical validation and just third it, but I'm going to say I really think any AI tool, no matter what problem it's trying to solve, like Lori kind of mentioned, explainability and transparency are non-negotiables and minimum standards. And I also think that if the system, one question I would ask is, how will the system tell me it doesn't know? And if you can't answer that for me, then I have red flag concerns. So I want the system to be able to tell me when it doesn't know or when it has incomplete data, right? Because even that could be actionable for me, but I need the system to be able to communicate that to me in some way.
How are issues related to inherent bias in the system handled? And have we noticed that? Or if we did, what would we do about it?
So I think this is really good because we've kind of alluded to like some SDOH stuff. But so I want to separate this out a little bit. There's multiple biases that we're talking about. We're talking about like human-based biases, right? Like, do some people get different care because of their age, gender, race, ethnicity bias? And then we also have other biases like an anchoring bias or a confirmation bias or a drift bias, right? That is more like AI technical. And so I always, whenever we talk about this question, I really try and parse that out. The human component is something that we work at regularly. We part of that is getting as much diverse patient data as possible, right? So when we were first doing our initial clinical validation with PHS related data 2 years ago, we were like, we need this many people that are in this age, we need this many people in this age, and we were testing it that way to try and eliminate some of that bias, right? And so that's kind of that humanistic bias piece. And those things continue to be tested, right? That is a part of our framework for the clinical validation is there a bias here that we are perpetuating, right? For lack of a better word. Or is there a bias here that we're missing, right? Like, is there something that should be here that we're not there yet? And that kind of goes into like the anchoring bias and some of those other things. But I really think it's important to scientific biases, maybe I'll call that, making it up as we go here, right? Scientific bias and then like a human-based bias, which I think is a legitimate concern and something that you need to account for and work against.
Anybody else have a comment on bias?
I don't know. I don't know if I have anything further to add on bias. I think that was a good statement. I think that one of the things that our physicians and APCs have been very happy with and impressed with is there has been a continuous feedback loop. And so real time as they are getting, clinical recommendations, as they're reviewing the summary, as they may be using the AI assistant, they have the ability to, thumbs up, thumbs down, type any feedback, any comments, any concerns of this recommendation is maybe concerning, right? I disagree with this guideline or whatever, or, in the sense of, could there be a bias there? Could there be concern that they're picking up on, right? But they have the ability real time to send that to the RhythmX team, to me, where again, then the clinical validation team at RhythmX is picking up on that and managing it real time quickly to close the loop on any of that. And they do come back with really great, they come back with information to the physicians and APCs to say, no, this was appropriate based on this guideline. Maybe you were referring to a different guideline, or, maybe not specifically appropriate to your patient who might be 90 years old and doesn't want to start a statin. So maybe it's more patient preference, right? But I think that is something that our physicians and APCs have felt like for the first time with technology and what they're using, that they have had the ability to have real time closed loop communication on things like this.
I would interpret that as you giving the ability to your physicians to give AI a dope slap.
Yeah, I would agree.
Good. Any other comments anybody wants to make before we sign off? Paul, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think you really have to look into, if you with evaluating any product, will it move the needle for your end users? How will this either benefit your clinicians? How will it benefit the practice? And how will it benefit your patients? And, is it something that's going to be adoptable and easy enough to use where you can get that change in behavior so people actually use it? Because if you're having, a bunch of products, but you and don't end up using them, then you're just, wasting time and money. So really look at those three major components when evaluating any product.
Sound advice. Mandy?
I was looking at the Q&A questions, and there was one question in there about stress testing and what a validation actually looks like. And I would just say, I think one of the powers of our clinical validation is that we are using, HIPAA compliant validation on the patient data that your organization has. Right. And I think that that's really, really powerful because, like you were saying, Rick, I could make up a synthetic patient who has one or two problems, whose labs are kind of okay. But when we're dealing with highly complex patients or wanting to consider the fact that patients are traveling 2 hours for their doctor's appointment, for their 15-minute doctor appointment, right, which is a reality at some of our locations, that it helps us put things into perspective a little bit more, and it helps us to build a better system. So I think doing the clinical validation and continuous iterative clinical validation on real patient data is honestly, it's just kind of extraordinary right now. And I think that that should be a bare minimum, but it is extraordinary in our industry right now.
Great. Lori, final word is yours.
I don't know if I have anything additional to add. Yeah, I don't think I have anything additional to add. I think I've been overall extremely impressed with our experience and the usage. We have data that goes to show our usage. And just again, I frequently go out and round in our clinics with our physicians and APCs, and I get a ton of feedback of how this saved this amount of time or saved me from having to make these certain phone calls or get a consult on an infectious disease. I was able to, use RhythmX Assistant and tap the guidelines and get an answer that was overall very complex. I could give numerous patient examples of where I'm hearing really positive feedback. And even from some of the patients, some of our physicians are openly showing it to the patients and what it's doing, and really positive feedback from the patients.
Great. I got to tell you guys, I'm so impressed with the three of you. I'm an old timer, and you are leading me down this path that I desperately don't want to go. But I'm almost there. I mean, you guys are really, really, really good. And God bless you, and thank you for your help today.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much, Rick. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.